Beneath the canopy of a continent that breathes with the rhythm of water and life, the Amazon River snakes through one of Earth's most primordial landscapes. From above, its tributaries resemble the arteries of some vast ancient beast, coiling through dense rainforest, flooding lowlands, and devouring all lesser streams that dare cross its path. Yet the river's story begins not in the steaming heart of the jungle, but deep beneath the crust of South America, shaped by upheavals that occurred millions of years before the first bird took flight over this land. The Amazon was not always a giant. In fact, it was not always a river at all. Roughly 100 million years ago, the land we now call the Amazon Basin was a shallow inland sea, hemmed in by two rising giants, the Andes to the west and the Brazilian Shield to the east. Sediment settled for eons in this trough, layering the basin floor with rich minerals and marine fossils, now buried beneath the forest floor. As the South American tectonic plate drifted westward, crashing into the Nazca Plate, the Andes began to rise, first slowly, then violently in geological time. With them came a great transformation. The sea drained, and what had been a vast estuary slowly hardened into land. But here, nature played one of its quieter tricks. For millions of years after the Andes rose, the water still flowed westward, toward the mountains, pooling in what scientists call the Pebas system, a sprawling wetland nearly the size of modern-day Europe. It's a concept that startles even seasoned geologists. The Amazon River once flowed in the opposite direction, draining east to west. Aquatic life from the Caribbean adapted to life in this strange inland sea, leaving behind ghostly traces in fossil records found today, hundreds of miles from the modern coastline. Crocodilian species that once hunted marine prey evolved into giants like Purosaurus, some the size of a city bus, whose bones rest today in sedimentary tombs. Only around 10 million years ago did the river begin to reverse its course. The Andes had grown tall and immovable. Rainfall, heavy and unrelenting, poured off their eastern slopes, carving valleys and shaping a new flow. With time, gravity overpowered the plateau, and the river turned, slowly, inexorably, cutting eastward toward the Atlantic. In doing so, it unlocked a hydrological engine that still drives the continent's climate today. Now the Amazon drains an area larger than India, spilling more fresh water into the sea than the next 7 largest rivers combined. Yet for all its might, it begins with barely a whisper. High in the Peruvian Andes, at a wind-swept altitude of over 5,000 meters, a few trickles of snowmelt emerge from a cracked rock near the Nevado-Mismi Peak. There is little to suggest that this meager stream will give rise to the world's greatest river. The wind here carries no scent of jungle, only the sterile bite of alpine air. No howler monkeys stir in these altitudes, no piranhas yet stalk the waters. As the young river tumbles downhill, it gathers strength. Tributaries join like limbs to a body, first hesitant, then overwhelming. It tears through narrow canyons where spectacled bears roam the ridgelines and torrent ducks surf rapids with inexplicable grace, clinging to eddies that would pulverize any other creature. These birds, living paradoxes, have evolved to paddle through whitewater chaos, using their broad bills to snatch insect larvae from rocks slick with algae and thyme. By the time the river enters the lowlands, its demeanor has changed. No longer erratic, it spreads wide, powerful and slow, bearing the weight of 10,000 streams. The forest closes in around it, emerald and unyielding. Rain falls with such intensity that sunlight barely touches the forest floor for weeks at a time. Here, in the basin proper, the Amazon becomes more than just a river. It is a system, a breathing, moving boundary between land and water, constantly reshaped by the seasons. During the wet months, the river floods its banks and spills into the forest, transforming trees into temporary mangroves. Fish swim through submerged groves, feeding on fallen fruit, while electric eels lurk in the shallows, their shocks strong enough to stun a horse. The Blackwater tributaries, rich with tannins from decaying vegetation, run dark and acidic, masking the outlines of predators like the anaconda, massive and still, coiled beneath driftwood, waiting. Other rivers bring different gifts. Whitewater streams, born from glacial melt and sediment, carry nutrients that feed plankton blooms and sustain the food chain from bottom to top. In these waters, the pink river dolphin patrols in eerie silence. Its sonar clicks imperceptible to human ears. Unlike its ocean cousins, it bends its neck to weave through roots and submerged trunks, navigating a three-dimensional maze with a kind of grace alien to mammals of its size. Predator and prey alike have adapted in bizarre, often brutal ways. The candiru, infamous for its parasitic habits, detects urea trails in the water, mistaking them for the gill emissions of larger fish. The arapaima, armored and ancient, rises to gulp air every few minutes, an evolutionary relic of its ancestors who lived in oxygen-poor waters. Even the forest seems to conspire with the river, shedding fruits and seeds precisely timed with the flood pulse, as if trees themselves have memorized the rhythms of water. None of this would exist were it not for the geological upheaval that reversed the Amazon's flow. Without that tectonic pivot, South America might still house a stagnant inland sea, and the modern rainforest, the most biodiverse biome on Earth, might never have taken root. Instead, the new eastward flow sculpted habitats layer by layer, supporting more species of fish than the entire Atlantic Ocean, and creating a corridor for evolution so prolific that new species are still catalogued almost weekly. Even now, the river remains unfinished. Sediment from the Andes continues to accumulate in the delta, pushing the mouth of the Amazon farther into the Atlantic with each passing century. What enters the ocean is not just fresh water, but millions of tons of minerals and organic material, feeding a plume that stretches hundreds of kilometers offshore. This plume alters weather, fuels marine food webs, and affects currents halfway across the globe. In this way, the river writes its legacy not only on land but into the sea itself. And while satellite images may chart its bends with cold precision, the Amazon defies total understanding. Beneath its coffee-colored surface lie channels that shift yearly, oxbow lakes that disappear into the forest, and trenches hundreds of feet deep carved by unknown forces. There are regions where no survey boat has passed, where tribes live whose languages remain undocumented, and where newly discovered species vanish just as quickly as they are named. To call it a river is both accurate and insufficient. It is a memory of mountains, a corridor of adaptation, a pulse that governs the tempo of half a continent. And still, in the most remote stretches of its headwaters, you can hear the whisper of its ancient confusion, an echo of the time when the Amazon did not know which way to flow. Dawn in the Amazon begins with motion. Not a gradual stir, but an unrelenting surge of life that explodes into activity the moment the sky begins to pale. Layers of mist cling to the upper canopy, slowly dispersing as shafts of early light pierce the treetops, scattering across broad leaves and the slick bark of centuries-old trees. The jungle never truly sleeps, but its transition into day brings an unmistakable shift. Cicadas fall silent as monkeys begin their territorial calls, deep, guttural bellows from howlers echoing over kilometers of forest. The scent of damp earth mixes with the faint musk of unseen mammals, and beneath the tangled undergrowth, something slithers. Few places on Earth match the Amazon's density of life, but what makes this region exceptional is not just its biodiversity, it is the strangeness, the behavioral intricacies and evolutionary dead ends that seem drawn from science fiction rather than natural history. Deep within the tangled interior, where even sunlight struggles to penetrate, a parallel world thrives, a biome driven not by visibility or speed, but by adaptation, patience, and deception. Moving through the flooded forest during the rainy season reveals creatures that are neither fully aquatic nor fully terrestrial. Here, the electric eel, Electrophorus electricus, navigates blackwater channels, often mistaken for a snake until it unleashes a jolt powerful enough to incapacitate larger prey. Though commonly referred to as an eel, it is more accurately a knife fish, capable of generating up to 600 volts of electricity. This biological weapon is not constant. The fish modulates its electric discharges depending on the situation. Quick bursts for communication, rhythmic pulses for navigation, and concentrated high-voltage shocks when hunting or defending itself. In stagnant, low-visibility waters where vision fails, electricity becomes a tool of remarkable precision. During the dry season, when water levels drop and pools become isolated, these eels become increasingly aggressive. Trapped in shrinking puddles with other fish, they may hunt cooperatively, encircling and stunning prey in synchrony, a behavior once dismissed as myth until observed in the wild. The electricity crackles through the water with a low, audible hum if one stands nearby, though it is more often felt by unlucky catfish or frogs that stray too close. Nearby, in an oxbow lake hidden from the main channel, a pink river dolphin breaks the surface with a puff of exhaled air. Unlike the marine dolphins known for sleek grace and speed, Inia geoffrensis glides with an almost spectral sluggishness, its mottled, rubbery body catching the light in soft pink hues, colors that intensify with age, hormonal changes, or even water temperature. The creature's small, unfocused eyes suggest blindness, but it navigates expertly, relying on echolocation fine-tuned to the flooded forest. The skeletal adaptations of this species allow for flexible neck movement, a rare trait in cetaceans, enabling the dolphin to twist and maneuver through submerged tree trunks and root systems in pursuit of fish hiding among the shadows. Despite its seemingly gentle demeanor, the pink dolphin is a solitary predator, with a jaw packed full of peg-like teeth that crush armored crustaceans and river turtles. During mating displays, males have been observed carrying large branches, even live turtles, in their mouths, a form of ritualized strength display that remains only partially understood. Local folklore attributes supernatural qualities to these animals, blending observed behaviors with generations of myth, though scientific curiosity has only deepened in recent years with the discovery of their subtle social structures and cryptic vocalizations. Descending into the forest floor, the atmosphere changes again. The canopy above filters the light into a greenish haze, punctuated by the occasional flutter of a morpho butterfly, its iridescent wings flashing blue with each clumsy beat. Underfoot, leaf litter conceals dangers both minute and lethal. A silent stalker moves among the fallen fronds. The bushmaster, Lachesis muta, the largest venomous snake in the Americas. Despite its size, it moves with unsettling stillness, its heat-sensing pits trained on a foraging agouti. One strike fast as the blink of an eye, and the mammal collapses. The venom does not act instantly. Instead, it begins to digest from within, a brutal process that allows the snake to track and consume its dying prey at leisure. Unlike vipers that strike and release, the bushmaster often remains coiled, confident, and still, a strategy evolved in response to prey that might vanish into dense vegetation. Above this drama, another unfolds in the mid-canopy, where a harpy eagle circles slowly. Nearly a meter tall, with talons the size of a grizzly bear's claws, this raptor hunts monkeys and sloths with explosive force. It does not soar like birds of open skies, but instead maneuvers through tight corridors between branches, using short, powerful wings and acute hearing to ambush from above. The weight of its strike often knocks prey from trees, breaking limbs or spinal cords before the bird even touches down. In its nest, built atop a saber tree, nearly 50 meters high, a single chick waits, watched over by parents that may raise only one offspring every 2 to 3 years. a reproductive pace that makes them vulnerable to deforestation and habitat fragmentation. Insects, often ignored in stories of megafauna, dominate the Amazon in both mass and function. Army ants, for instance, operate as a mobile superorganism. Each raid involves hundreds of thousands of individuals sweeping across the forest floor, devouring everything in their path, from beetle larvae to grounded fledglings. Their presence triggers secondary waves of opportunistic predators. Antbirds, small and sharp-eyed, follow the swarm not to be eaten, but to catch insects flushed from hiding. These birds have developed an almost parasitic relationship with the ants, mapping their movements and even competing with each other for prime feeding positions near the swarm's edges. Other insects operate with more subtlety. In the leafcutter ant colonies, some of the most complex animal societies on Earth, tiny workers snip fragments of vegetation not to eat directly, but to feed a cultivated fungus deep underground. Each caste in the colony performs a precise function, from foragers to soldiers to waste managers, all communicating through chemical signals so specific they can signal alarm, food type or caste needs with a single drop of pheromone. The fungus itself cannot survive without the ants, and vice versa, a co-evolutionary pact that dates back tens of millions of years. Even now, the forest hides animals science can barely classify. In 2013, a camera trap recorded a peculiar short-snouted mammal resembling no known species of peccary. Biologists have found frogs that gestate their young inside their vocal sacs, and beetles whose larvae hatch in water-filled bromeliads suspended 10 meters off the ground. These micro-habitats, plants within the trees that hold miniature ecosystems, support entire food chains: mosquito larvae, carnivorous mites, tadpoles of rare amphibians. Each pocket, often no larger than a teacup, contains life forms found nowhere else. And then there are the creatures still undiscovered, sensed only in partial glimpses or unfamiliar sounds. Bioluminescent fungi that glow eerily under the moonlight. Fish that breathe air and crawl short distances over land. Mammals that leave scat with DNA that matches no recorded species. The remoteness of these regions, coupled with their vertical complexity, means that entire taxonomic groups may yet remain unseen by science. In the Amazon, discovery is not a past event. It is a process still unfolding. Every new species catalogued confirms what locals have long understood: that life here evolves not in straight lines, but in branches, loops, and spirals. Behaviors once thought rare turn out to be common in the right microclimate. Anatomical adaptations once labeled bizarre are revealed to be logical answers to pressures unique to this place. Even the dangerous, the venomous, the electrified, the ambush predators are not chaotic, but precisely tuned to the rhythms of their environment. Here in the deep jungle, where sight lines stretch no more than a few meters and every movement carries a consequence, survival depends not on dominance, but on mastery of the margins. It is a world that rewards specialization, favors the misunderstood, and hides its most astonishing creatures not in the open, but in the space between light and shadow. The forest floor, damp and dappled with shifting shadow, has long hidden more than roots and reptiles. Beneath the dense layers of humus and fallen leaves, beneath the buttressed trees and tangled vines, lies a world long assumed never to have existed. For centuries, the Amazon was believed to be a wilderness untouched by large-scale human architecture, too poor in nutrients, too hostile in climate, too vast to tame. And yet, the canopy above conceals patterns invisible to the naked eye, but unmistakable when viewed from the sky. Broad geometric shapes, aligned mounds, rectilinear roads, evidence not of untouched wilderness, but of forgotten cities. It begins with soil, of all things. In a region where tropical rains leach nutrients from the earth with relentless efficiency, certain patches of land are inexplicably fertile. These dark, charcoal-rich soils, known as terra preta, appear in distinct human-shaped clusters: circular village outlines, raised causeways, agricultural plots etched into floodplains. Modern analysis reveals layers of burnt plant matter, bone, broken pottery, and microbial richness, all dating back hundreds to thousands of years. These soils are not natural accidents, they are engineered. Indigenous peoples, now largely absent from the historical record, enrich their land on a generational scale, turning sterile forest into long-term farmland. Such practices suggest permanence, foresight, and scale. Civilization, not mere subsistence. In recent decades, technology has allowed us to see beneath the canopy in ways once impossible. Using LiDAR, light detection, and ranging, archaeologists have scanned the forest from aircraft, stripping away vegetation with laser pulses to reveal the ground's contours in remarkable detail. In the southern Amazon, near the Brazilian state of Acre, these scans uncovered hundreds of geometric earthworks, circles, squares, intersecting ditches, and ceremonial avenues extending for kilometers. Some are over 10 meters deep, encircled by raised berms and connected by straight roads that continue through forest and river alike. They are not defensive structures. There are no palisades or signs of warfare. Instead, they suggest complex ritual or civic planning, an ancient landscape of intentional design. Further north in the upper Jingu region, the forest swallows the remnants of what may once have been a network of urban settlements. Traces of walled enclosures, managed forests, and engineered fish ponds reveal a pattern of living that was both dense and sustainable. Researchers working with Kwikuro descendants, the likely inheritors of this legacy, have mapped dozens of village sites connected by broad causeways, aligned with cardinal directions, and surrounded by cultivated orchards. These settlements followed a radial pattern, with central plazas surrounded by satellite housing and agricultural fields beyond. The symmetry and planning are unmistakable, recalling city-states more than jungle encampments. This revelation upends long-standing assumptions that the Amazon could not support dense populations. Early European explorers like Francisco de Orellana in the 1540s wrote of large riverside communities with multi-storied buildings, coordinated agriculture, and busy trade routes. Later chroniclers dismissed these reports as exaggerations, assuming the jungle quickly reclaimed any temporary habitation. But perhaps it was not the chroniclers who were mistaken, but the timing. Disease, introduced by contact even before physical arrival, may have depopulated entire civilizations before later expeditions ever arrived. Viruses traveled faster than ships. By the time foreign eyes returned, cities had already been consumed by green silence. The architecture of these civilizations extended vertically and horizontally. In Bolivia's Llanos de Moxos, archaeologists have uncovered remnants of pre-Columbian pyramids, built not from stone, but from packed earth, standing 10 meters high and flanked by canal systems and artificial mounds. These were not monuments to excess, but functional designs, part of a vast hydraulic network meant to manage seasonal flooding. Raised fields, drain channels, and fish weirs span thousands of square kilometers, enabling food production far beyond what slash-and-burn agriculture could yield. Insect-infested wetlands were transformed into managed ecosystems, human-nature collaborations that sustained populations likely numbering in the hundreds of thousands. The geoglyphs tell a quieter story. These massive earthworks, some stretching over 300 meters across, are so precise in their geometry that their full shapes are only visible from the air. In the dry forest zones of Acre, satellite imaging has revealed more than 450 such formations, their lines still sharp after nearly 2 millennia. They vary in complexity. Some are simple squares or circles, others intricate with parallel ditches and zigzagging berms. Whatever their purpose, ceremonial, astronomical, or administrative, They represent an investment of labor and planning that could only have been afforded by organized, cooperative societies. And still, the jungle keeps its secrets well. Many of these sites were only discovered when fires or deforestation stripped the forest cover away. Others remain untouched, their contours only faintly hinted at by the unusual growth patterns of trees, some species flourishing above ancient earthworks, others conspicuously absent. This ecological imprint has become a tool in itself. By studying the composition of forest patches, botanists have learned to detect past human influence in the very structure of the vegetation. In parts of the Amazon, as much as 10% of so-called wild forest is shaped by long-abandoned agroforestry practices, clusters of Brazil nut, cacao, and acai trees planted centuries ago, still fruiting in ghost orchards under a canopy that remembers more than it reveals. The animals too interact with this hidden past in ways we are only beginning to understand. Armadillos burrow into mounds that turn out to be ancient refuse pits, churning up pottery shards and bone fragments. Capuchin monkeys forage in abandoned orchards, favoring fruit trees whose genetic traits may have been selected by human hands long ago. Tortoises congregate on old causeways that rise above seasonal floods, corridors that may have once served humans and now offer passage to wildlife. Even the movements of jaguars tracked via GPS collars show preference for ridgelines and raised forest paths that correspond to ancient roads. This blurred boundary between nature and civilization complicates the very idea of wilderness. What appears untouched may in fact be a post-catastrophe regrowth, a secondary forest where every tree sprouted atop a foundation of human effort. It reframes conservation itself, not as the preservation of an imagined pristine state, but as stewardship of a landscape long shaped by coexistence. These civilizations did not conquer the forest. They collaborated with it, learned its seasonal language, and carved enduring structures from earth, not stone. Their legacy is not one of ruins, but of resilience. In many ways, the jungle is an archive, not of stone monuments, but of systems, relationships, and adaptations. Its great cities do not rise in triumph from mountaintops. They are woven into the soil, visible only to those who learn how to read the terrain. And as the forest reclaims what it once hosted, we begin to understand that the Amazon is not only the cradle of biodiversity, but also the resting ground of civilizations whose complexity rivaled any of their time. Their story is not erased, only buried, waiting beneath the roots and leaves to be uncovered piece by piece, layer by layer. There are places in the Amazon where even the bravest trackers hesitate, where the air hangs heavier, quieter, as if sound itself avoids stirring the underbrush. In these seldom mapped stretches of forest, the river forgets its sprawling momentum and retreats into isolated pools, blackwater lagoons so still they reflect the canopy like obsidian mirrors. These are not the loud, life-drenched arteries of the main river, but stagnant, acidic hollows where decay rules and light withers. The forest here seems to breathe more slowly, its pace governed by unseen things moving just beneath the surface. Blackwater lakes are born not of pollution or man-made waste, but of natural chemistry. Rainfall leaches tannins from rotting vegetation, turning the water dark and tea-colored. These dissolved organic compounds absorb sunlight and suppress algae growth, rendering the water both low in nutrients and surprisingly clear, yet eerily opaque in appearance. Beneath the surface, visibility drops to centimeters. Even seasoned divers speak of a disorienting loss of direction, of a spatial confusion more psychological than physical. In these waters, vision becomes irrelevant, and survival relies on something else entirely: instinct, electroreception, and silence. Here, predators favor patience over power. The Amazonian cichlid, a small fish often ignored in grand narratives of the jungle, has evolved a complex strategy for breeding in these nutrient-starved habitats. Males excavate crater-like nests in the sandy shallows, then defend them with startling aggression, fanning eggs with their fins to increase oxygen flow in a place where even bacteria struggle to metabolize. These breeding grounds draw scavengers, snails, smaller fish, and occasionally the pale, translucent larvae of insects adapted to hypoxic conditions. Each layer of life here is locked in a narrow chemical balance. Yet deeper in these blackwater regions, stranger things begin to emerge. Whirlpools form without warning, sometimes miles from any known confluence. Their spinning centers rarely pull with deadly force, but they stir superstitions that long predate colonial maps. Local accounts often point to enchanted holes, depressions in the riverbed where currents collapse and reform with tidal irregularity, pulling leaves, sediment, and sometimes unsuspecting animals into their folds. These hydraulic anomalies are real, linked to shifts in subterranean geology or uneven sediment layering. But their effect on the human imagination has proven far more powerful than any measurable flow rate. Stories of drownings in calm water, of bodies surfacing days later with no sign of trauma, feed a collective memory of something watching from below. Many of the river's more remote tributaries also harbor poisons more subtle than the whirlpool's drag. The waters of the Rio Negro, for instance, are famed for their dark color and extreme acidity, reaching pH levels as low as 3.5 in some regions, comparable to vinegar. This acidity sterilizes the water of many common parasites and pathogens, making it safer for drinking than it appears. But this same chemistry creates zones where only the most chemically tolerant species can survive. Some fish species, like the discus and cardinal tetra, have evolved not just a resistance to the water's pH, but entire physiological mechanisms to manage osmotic stress, selectively absorbing ions while minimizing dehydration. This is aquatic life sculpted by hardship, not abundance. Still, not all threats are biological or chemical. Across the Amazon, natural features have become fused with layers of oral history, creating a topography of fear and reverence. One such tale centers around Encantado, the spectral version of the pink river dolphin, believed by some to possess the ability to shift form and seduce or deceive. While folklore transforms this animal into a mythic trickster, its natural behaviors already straddle the edge of the uncanny. These dolphins often congregate around the mouths of blackwater creeks, where acoustic signals behave differently, bouncing unpredictably off submerged roots and dense silt. Here, echolocation becomes distorted, creating overlapping clicks and whistles that researchers sometimes mistake for multiple individuals, only to find a single dolphin circling slowly, methodically, as if probing the limits of sonic reality. Elsewhere in the basin, smaller creatures reinforce the jungle's sense of hidden threat. The Phreatobius genus of catfish, almost entirely blind and rarely observed alive, lives within underground aquifers and emerges only during seasonal floods. In times of extreme drought, they are found stranded in tree hollows or beneath leaf litter, seemingly having crawled across land in pursuit of evaporating puddles. How they locate these ephemeral waters remains unclear, possibly through chemosensory cues or moisture gradients, but their survival strategies seem almost calculated. They are evolutionary holdouts from another era, rarely photographed and poorly understood, yet perfectly suited to a region where water can vanish overnight. Perhaps most unnerving are the death zones that appear during seasonal transitions. In some floodplain lakes, oxygen levels can drop precipitously when sudden rainstorms churn the stratified layers of water, bringing up decaying matter from the anoxic bottom. The result is a mass die-off, fish floating belly up, reptiles crawling sluggishly to escape, birds circling and scavenging in sudden abundance. These events are entirely natural and often short-lived, but the spectacle is unforgettable. To an untrained observer, it appears apocalyptic, an entire ecosystem choking on its own breath. In the midst of this shifting, often contradictory landscape, tribal narratives serve not merely as superstition, but as encoded maps of caution and observation. Among the Yanomami and Tikuna peoples, certain waterholes are known not to be crossed at night, not out of fear of phantoms, but because these sites coincide with seasonal breeding grounds of venomous aquatic snakes, such as Hydrophis platurus, whose occasional incursions into fresh water remain rare but recorded. Other legends warn of sleeping lakes that change shape over time, swallowing trails and banks without warning. These areas often align with known oxbow lakes, former meanders of the main river that have cut off and evolved into independent ecosystems, prone to collapse and flood without pattern. In this sense, myth becomes a form of ecological memory, preserving knowledge across generations that modern instruments have only recently begun to verify. The rainforest's vastness has always bred a sense of the uncanny, not because it defies science, but because its scale and complexity exceed human familiarity. Every sound, the distant thud of a falling branch, the sudden splash of a caiman, registers as a potential sign of something unseen. Even the trees participate in this quiet performance of ambiguity. Species like the Macrolobium acaciifolium, which thrives near blackwater streams, emit root exudates that inhibit the growth of competitors, shaping plant communities through chemical warfare invisible to the eye. In this theater of subtle aggression and adaptation, it becomes increasingly difficult to separate biological fact from symbolic interpretation. What emerges is not a jungle of monsters and curses, but a layered ecosystem whose every strangeness has an origin, ecological, chemical, or behavioral. The mystery is not diminished by explanation, it is deepened by understanding. Toxic waters are not the product of malevolence, but of finely tuned balances responding to seasonal rhythms, geological quirks, and evolutionary constraints. The legends, while often embellished, point to real hazards, misleading currents, venomous inhabitants, or simply the psychological toll of navigating a world where so much is concealed. In these corners of the Amazon, the eerie is not an interruption of nature, but part of its language. To travel here is to move through stories written in water, sediment, and shadow, some decipherable, some still waiting to be translated. And always beneath the surface something stirs. In the Amazon, survival is rarely loud. The fiercest battles are not fought with roars or splashes, but in the stillness between rainfalls, the quiet tension beneath the soil, or the hushed exchanges of chemical messages between leaf and root. This forest, immense and seemingly harmonious, is in fact a battleground of intricate, invisible conflict, an arena where life is forced to compete not by strength alone, but by subterfuge, precision, and adaptation. For every bird that flies and every jaguar that stalks, there are legions of organisms locked in a quieter war, waged not in speed, but in strategy. At ground level, the forest appears deceptively serene. Trees tower upward in search of sunlight, their trunks cloaked in moss and lianas. But beneath this vertical scramble, in the thin, nutrient-poor soil, lies one of the most competitive zones on the planet. Here, roots sprawl outward rather than deep, fighting for the thin layer of organic matter produced by the rapid decay of fallen leaves and dead insects. Every drop of nitrogen, every trace of phosphorus is contested. The struggle isn't visible to the human eye, but its effects ripple outward. Stunted saplings, distorted growth patterns, chemical sabotage among neighbors. Some tree species, like Dipteryx odorata, exude allelopathic compounds from their roots that inhibit the germination of nearby competitors. This invisible warfare shapes the very composition of the forest, determining which species can thrive and which must relocate or die. But this contest extends far beyond trees. Microbes, fungi, and bacteria engage in a molecular arms race beneath the leaf litter. The Amazon soil hosts some of the most diverse microbial communities on Earth, and each species has evolved its own means of survival. Mycorrhizal fungi, for instance, form symbiotic relationships with plant roots, extending their networks to gather water and minerals in exchange for sugars. But not all fungi cooperate. Some behave like parasites, penetrating roots and extracting resources without offering anything in return. Others launch chemical assaults on rival fungi, releasing enzymes that break down hyphae or alter soil pH to tilt the advantage. These are conflicts played out in darkness, with no sounds, no visuals, only consequences. Carnivorous plants, typically associated with temperate wetlands, have found niches here too, though they are less obvious amid the forest's overwhelming growth. Among them, the genus Utricularia, the bladderworts, has evolved an aquatic trap system so small and so fast it defies real-time observation. Their bladder-like organs create a vacuum-sealed environment that sucks in microscopic prey, zooplankton, insect larvae, even protozoa, in less than a millisecond. This mechanism is triggered not by movement, but by the displacement of tiny hairs, a mechanical sensitivity honed by evolutionary arms races with prey that have grown increasingly elusive. The plant digests what it captures with secreted enzymes, recycling the limited nutrients offered by swampy, acidic waters where few others can survive. Elsewhere, the Philcoxia genus employs an even more surreal strategy. These plants grow in nutrient-poor white sand soils and produce underground leaves that act as traps for nematodes. Using sticky mucilage, they capture and digest these microscopic worms entirely below the surface, an inversion of traditional carnivory turned toward the hidden dimension of soil ecosystems. This adaptation allows them to sidestep the competition for surface resources altogether, feeding instead on organisms most plants never touch. The animals of the forest are not immune to these silent tensions. Leafcutter ants, often admired for their agricultural precision, are not merely harvesting foliage, they are supplying a subterranean fungus that feeds the colony. But this relationship is continually under threat. Parasitic fungi from the Escovopsis genus target the leafcutter fungus directly, attempting to invade the carefully maintained chambers and consume the crop before the ants can. In response, the ants cultivate actinobacteria on their bodies, living antibiotics that produce compounds to suppress the invaders. It is a three-way arms race: ant, cultivated fungus, and fungal parasite, with chemical warfare at its core. Each generation must refine its defenses, or the balance collapses. This dynamic of interdependence and hostility repeats in countless forms. Army ants move through the forest in living rivers, raiding nests and flushing out prey. Their passage triggers alarm in nearly every layer of the forest, and yet their rampage opens feeding opportunities for others. Birds like the ocellated antbird and white-plumed antbird follow these swarms not out of fear, but strategy. They wait just at the edges, picking off insects that flee the ant onslaught. Over time, these birds have adapted to recognize the acoustic signatures of army ant movement, following not scent or sight, but sound. The ants themselves are oblivious to the opportunism they create. What appears as destruction to one species becomes an opening for another, a paradox that defines the Amazon's ecological logic. Even the canopy is rife with hidden confrontations. Epiphytes cling to host trees in an unspoken truce, drawing moisture from the air and nutrients from decaying debris caught in their leaves. But some push the boundary. Strangler figs begin life as innocuous seedlings dropped into the upper branches by birds. As they grow, they send roots downward and stems upward, engulfing their host tree slowly, methodically. The fig doesn't kill by poison or pressure alone, but by theft, stealing sunlight, soil contact, and eventually structural support. The host weakens, dies, and decays, leaving a hollow column of living fig in its place. It is a slow coup masked by patience. Beneath the still waters of the floodplain, another kind of silent war plays out. Microscopic algae compete with cyanobacteria for light and carbon. Their balance determines the oxygen levels in the water, levels that dictate the survival of fish, amphibians, and even aquatic insects. A subtle shift, too much shade from seasonal flooding, too much runoff from upstream, can tilt the equilibrium, resulting in algal blooms or oxygen crashes that devastate entire aquatic communities. These effects cascade outward. A single bloom might wipe out insect larvae, which starves the fish that feed on them, which in turn reduces food for birds that time their migrations to the aquatic hatch cycles. Here, even the microbial is monumental. Among these intricate battles, there are moments of alliance as well, treaties brokered by evolution rather than intention. The bullet ant and certain acacia species offer one such example. The ant nests within the tree's hollow thorns and feeds on its sugary secretions. In exchange, the ants patrol the branches, attacking herbivores, clearing vines, and even clipping the leaves of encroaching competitors. This is not affection, it is tactical cooperation. Without the ant, the acacia is consumed. Without the tree, the ant is exposed. Their survival is mutual, and their weapons, chemical secretions, stings, warning pheromones, are used with the precision of soldiers defending sovereign ground. In the Amazon, success is rarely about dominance in the way it is often imagined. It is about leverage, about finding a foothold in a system already dense with life, then defending it through whatever means are available. Poison, deception, mimicry, immunity, cooperation, and sabotage are all valid strategies. Each organism here plays multiple roles: predator and prey, host and parasite, competitor and partner. And so the war continues, not with fanfare, but in pollen grains drifting through shafts of sun, in microbial exchanges at the root tip, in enzymes secreted from a petal to deter a visitor that is not the right pollinator. It is a war without victory, without ceasefire, where every adaptation answers another, and no success is permanent. Every species is both a survivor and a target. The forest, vast and green, is not a sanctuary. It is a contest, brilliant, brutal, and silent. At the heart of the Amazon, where the river broadens into a shifting, slow-moving floodplain, and the sky merges with water in endless grey reflection, there are depths that remain unmeasured, not for lack of effort, but for the sheer resistance of the landscape itself. This is a region where even the most advanced tools struggle to pierce the opacity. Sediment cloud sonar, rain masks electromagnetic scans, and the sheer volume of life confounds pattern recognition. Yet recent years have seen technology reach into places once thought unreachable. And what is emerging, fragment by fragment, is a picture as unsettling as it is extraordinary. It begins with anomalies, not discoveries, but distortions, sensor readings that don't align with known geological forms, temperature variations in zones long believed inert, or sonar echoes that suggest artificial angles where there should be none. Researchers aboard survey vessels drifting above the river's deeper channels have recorded pulses bouncing back with unnatural regularity, echoes that imply large cavities or structures beneath layers of silt and water. In some locations, these returns come from depths of over 100 meters, far below what most divers, even with full support crews, can safely explore. The signals are not sharp enough to form clear outlines, but consistent enough to hint at underground voids, cavities that may be natural caves, or something shaped by water and time into more symmetrical forms. These are not limestone sinkholes like those found in the Yucatan or Florida. The geology here is more complex, an ancient mix of sandstone, metamorphic bedrock, and unconsolidated sediment. Yet within this patchwork, subterranean aquifers and hollowed fault zones can exist, fed by rainfall filtered through kilometers of porous forest floor. Occasionally, these formations become exposed. Rare collapses along the banks reveal hidden chambers, cold and airless, echoing with the drip of ancient water. Inside, life persists in isolation. Blind catfish, entirely without pigment, swim in slow spirals. Pale insects cling to the moist stone, feeding on fungal threads that thrive in total darkness. These cave systems, poorly mapped and largely unexplored, are microbial vaults, preserving genetic lineages untouched by surface evolution, some potentially dating back millions of years. But it's not only the physical that draws attention. In scattered locations, particularly in the western Amazon, where the river nears the foothills of the Andes, researchers have recorded acoustic signals that defy easy classification. Initially assumed to be bioacoustic noise, dolphins, fish, or tectonic friction, some of these pulses follow rhythmic patterns. They pulse at intervals too regular to be dismissed as random, yet they do not match any known communication of river fauna. Hydrophones deployed along deep channels have picked up low-frequency sounds lasting minutes at a time, sometimes shifting pitch, other times repeating with near mechanical precision. While some have dismissed these as anomalies or equipment interference, others have suggested alternative explanations, none of which are easily tested in such a remote and unstable environment. Even satellite imaging, despite its immense reach, is limited here. The Amazon's constant cloud cover, the reflective glare of water, and the vegetative density all act as natural shields against high-resolution optical surveillance. But synthetic aperture radar, able to penetrate canopy and surface debris, has offered brief glimpses into the substructure of the floodplain. In the dry season, when the river recedes and exposes temporary islands and sandbars, radar imaging has revealed rectilinear patterns too consistent to be geological. They appear and vanish with the flood cycle, buried beneath meters of shifting silt. Some resemble the outlines of walls or foundations. Others align with no known cultural or natural formation. These are not definitive signs of lost architecture, but they raise questions that traditional excavation cannot yet answer. In a place where the river rewrites its own landscape every year, evidence doesn't erode, it disappears entirely. The animals that dwell near these sites behave differently as well. Electric fish, such as gymnotus species, have been documented altering their electric field patterns near certain deep water zones, emitting bursts more frequently or modulating waveforms in a way that suggests detection of foreign objects or barriers. These fish rely on electrolocation, a biological radar, to perceive their environment. Changes in their behavior can signal underwater structures that are otherwise imperceptible to human instruments. In some cases, these fish avoid specific zones altogether, areas that appear outwardly normal yet seem to disrupt their sensory maps. Even vegetation above these mysterious depths offers subtle clues. Certain tree species, which typically avoid wet, unstable ground, are found thriving in neat lines or clusters above suspected cavities, indicating firm ground just below the surface where none should exist. Botanists studying root depth and growth patterns have identified discrepancies between surface ecology and expected subsurface conditions. The trees are telling a story that does not match current soil maps. There are also ancient stories passed down among the forest's remaining indigenous groups, accounts of forbidden pools, caves that breathe in mist, and bodies of water that sing at night. While often framed in the language of spirit and taboo, these oral traditions sometimes mirror physical observations made with instruments. One tribal memory describes a lake with two mouths, which floods in dry seasons and recedes in wet, a hydrological impossibility until researchers modeled the behavior of an underground spring linked to a collapsed cave system, where reverse water flow is possible during extreme barometric shifts. What sounds like myth becomes a coded record of phenomena observed over generations in ways that transcend scientific measurement. Not far from the confluence of the Solimois and Negro rivers, where the waters flow side by side, unmixed for miles, a separate curiosity has drawn attention. Sonar imaging has revealed a submerged rift in the riverbed, deeper than surrounding areas by more than 30 meters. Within this depression, temperature gradients fluctuate abnormally, with pockets of water significantly colder than expected for the region. These thermoclines may suggest freshwater springs rising from below, or vents releasing ancient water trapped in aquifers sealed since the Miocene. Samples retrieved by probe contain mineral traces not commonly found in surface water, such as elevated levels of silicate and rare earth elements, indicating that these flows may originate from geological layers far beneath the known aquifers. In a river system so well studied on its surface, the idea of unknown internal circulations challenges assumptions about hydrology, climate interaction, and even evolutionary history. What lies beneath the Amazon is not merely uncharted terrain, it is unmeasured time. These submerged structures and signals may preserve evidence not just of ecological processes, but of pre-human events, of Earth's internal functions still unfolding. And while it is tempting to dramatize the unknown, the real gravity of these discoveries is in what they reveal about our limits. In a world where satellites circle every hour and data pours in by the terabyte, this region still holds out, a blind spot, a noise in the system, a question without coordinates. It is not emptiness, it is resistance. Resistance to clarity, to finality, to the idea that we already understand the planet we inhabit. The Amazon, in its depths, continues to remind us that the more we uncover, the more complex the terrain becomes, not because it hides, but because we have only begun to ask the right questions. So we listen to pulses from beneath the riverbed, to the silence of caves that have never seen light, to the shifting sediment that erases answers as fast as they appear. And in that silence there is something final, not an ending, but a depth beyond metaphor. A secret that isn't hidden at all, only waiting.